What's going on, everyone, and welcome to the first installment of Answering Your Questions. If you don't know who I am, my name is Jonathan Riddell, and I am a postdoctoral fellow in theoretical physics. If you want me to answer your questions, I recommend joining my Discord channel. The link for that is in the description. So ask any question you like. I'm usually quite responsive on Discord. The questions today are geared towards graduate school, but feel free to ask scientific questions, even philosophical questions. So without further delay, let's jump into question 1. What qualities should I look for in a potential supervisor? So I would say there are lots of personality traits that make a good supervisor. And some of those traits will actually depend on who you are as well. The easiest thing to identify is actually the bad personality traits or the red flags. Things that you can spot in a potential supervisor that won't work with anyone or won't work with mostly everyone. Some questions to ask to spot easy red flags are the following. Do their current students speak well of your prospective supervisor? Does this professor publish frequently? And when they do publish, do their students publish with them? Now, of course, every article doesn't need to be published with their students. There just needs to be evidence that they do publish with their students somewhat frequently. So these questions are easy to see with a quick Google search on your prospective supervisor. So you can look up their Google Scholar, and look up who is in their group if that information is accessible. And even if that information isn't accessible, no matter what happens, you should be speaking to their students and you should be speaking to them, preferably over a video call or in person, before committing 2 to 6 years of your life for a graduate school program. So those are all things that you can sort of figure out before you commit. Another big thing is, do they send their students to conferences and workshops? This will be important for your growth, for network opportunities, and many other things. Another thing to look at would be if they introduce their current students to their own network of researchers that they tap into for collaborations. It can be hard and sort of intimidating to expand your own network, so accessing your supervisor's network is a surefire way of meeting new people and potentially getting new collaborations. But to double down, no matter what you do, I recommend to speak to their current students if you get the chance, preferably sort of privately without your prospective supervisor in the room or in the call. Another thing to say is that some potential green flags could potentially be red flags for you. Some students want a lot of involvement from their supervisor in their project, and some want more sparse interactions and direction from their supervisor. Some supervisors are extremely motivated and add you into existing projects, so this can lead to some good early progress in terms of publications, but you need to make sure that they have your growth in mind during these projects as well. So you need to find a way to probe whether or not you are just an extra computing drone for them, or if you are a student to them. Other supervising styles will maybe give you a concept, a paper or two, and more or less let you pave your own path, of course with their input. So this is a bit of a slower start, but it can also be quite helpful and allow you to grow a lot as a researcher. But if that is their style, are they actually available to their students to regularly bounce around ideas and check on progress? So the big takeaway here is your supervisor really dictates a long period of your life, and they also dictate how successful you will be to a certain extent. So definitely do your research at this stage in your career. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And most importantly, if there are a lot of red flags, I wouldn't recommend that you talk yourself into accepting them. So question number 2, how can I make sure that I'm giving myself the best possible chance to succeed in research? So this to me is very related to the previous question. Finding the right supervisor is the first step, unfortunately. You want to be in an environment that you can thrive in, an environment you can grow and succeed. My next piece of advice, though, is about the topic that you choose to do research in. At the end of the day, you need to like what you do. And what I mean by that is you need to like the tasks that you will be regularly carrying out in your everyday life. So if topic A does linear algebra and topic B does integration all day, but you hate integration, odds are you'll be more successful in topic A. So not only should you like the questions that you ask or like the big picture ideas of your field, importantly, you should also like the day-to-day tasks. Or at the very least, you should tolerate the day-to-day tasks. So the next question is a little longer. Additionally, I'm wondering how much time I have to explore my interests. If I choose to pursue a project that is outside of my declared area of research, am I losing valuable time that could be spent working on finding publications in my area, or is having a broad interest something that could help me? So this is a tough one to balance. But I would say that if you do a project or a research line outside of your field, I'd recommend doing it with another senior of yours, either an experienced PhD student, a postdoc, or another professor. At the end of the day, there is a finite amount of energy and time that you will have to tackle your work day in and day out. If your ultimate goal is to stay in research, then at the end of your PhD, you'll want a number of articles published and the ability to explore potentially multiple research directions, having all of that under your belt. And preferably, those directions should complement each other in some capacity so that they can be packaged together. So I definitely don't want to discourage you from taking on new topics. Read articles that interest you, of course. To be honest, you'll never know which articles will end up revealing a technique or a trick to help you get to the next step in some completely separate, unrelated project, potentially your current project. I would lastly like to suggest that if you're a brand new graduate student, that you take on new projects once you are comfortable enough with your primary project. So as I mentioned, you have a finite time to explore topics. Most very productive researchers who publish several times a year do so with collaborators. So definitely, eventually, once you're ready, look to join projects or collaborations when expanding your horizons. So the last question for today is, I will be starting graduate school soon. Any advice on reading papers and computation? So there are two types of reading a paper, or two sort of broad goals of reading a paper. So the first one is reading to understand what they did and sort of what their conclusions are. And the second is reading it to understand how they did it. So I'd say a good suggestion is to recognize which one you are trying to do when you open the article. Perhaps your first pass through should always be to understand what they did and what their conclusions are. And with that in mind, if you get stuck somewhere in the article, let's say on a math step, it's okay, you can just keep reading. If you do let yourself get stuck on every single math step on every single paper you read, you're not going to read very many papers. But once you need to understand the how, definitely put the time in to understand the steps that you don't understand. But the set of papers that you're going to want to fully understand how they did everything in that article is going to be much smaller than the set of all of the articles you're going to want to read. So just keep in mind your goal while reading the article. And for computation, especially if you would be writing all of your own code, I would say over the course of your graduate career and beyond, strive to be better every single time you write new code or you're updating code. That being said, I would suggest first writing code that just works. Your first results don't need to be generated from beautiful code. But by the end of your PhD, your code should look cleaner and be much more optimized than the code that you wrote when you started. So the summary of that recommendation is to try and get results done first, get results out, especially if, let's say, you're a computational physicist, you should prioritize the physics sometimes. But as you go along, continue to try and improve the computational part. But that's it for this video. If you did like the video, feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.